In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 NHL games happening on January 27, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 NHL games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Buffalo Sabres versus Toronto Maple Leafs. So we have Buffalo coming into Toronto on January 27, and it really feels like the classic matchup between the hungry climber and the polished favorite that has a few cracks in the paint these days. Buffalo shows up with a record of 29-17-5, sitting third in the Atlantic, which means this is not a cute little hot streak anymore. This is a team that has turned its season into a real push up the standings. They have been living on the right side of the goal math, scoring more than they allow over the long haul, and you can see it in those recent results on the road, stringing together wins in Nashville, Montreal, and on Long Island, where they did not just sneak by, they controlled the tone of those games. There is also that front office jolt sitting underneath everything, with the general manager switch in mid-December sending a not-so-subtle message that the long playoff drought is no longer something this franchise is willing to simply live with, and the group on the ice has responded by playing with more structure and urgency rather than waiting for the next reset. On the other side, Toronto walks into this game with a record of 24-19-9, a home mark of 16-8-6, and a slight negative goal differential that pretty much sums up how this season has felt for their fans. Solid in flashes, but never quite as clean as the logo suggests it should be. Lately, that big home crowd has been watching more frustration than celebration, with this homestand featuring the kind of losses that sting. A tight grind against Detroit, and then a rough afternoon against Colorado where defensive mistakes and missed chances piled up again. Stylistically, Toronto still has plenty of talent and they can absolutely tilt the ice for stretches, but the identity question keeps popping up because they talk about being heavier and more stable defensively, yet the goals against column keeps telling a slightly different story than the pregame quotes do. Buffalo, by contrast, feels more comfortable in its own skin right now, playing a brand of hockey that travels pretty well, with a road record of 13-11-2 that has been moving in the right direction as their structure in front of the net has tightened up and their confidence in close games has grown. So when you line it all up, you have the home favorite with the louder building and the bigger brand, but also more volatility and scoreboard drama against a visiting team that has been steadily banking points and outscoring opponents over the last stretch. And for this matchup, we are more inclined to trust the group that has been doing the simple things right night after night rather than the one still searching for its best version. As our first pick for this matchup, the Buffalo Sabres money line is our full game side pick. Buffalo games this season have lived in that sweet spot where offense shows up often enough to keep things lively, with their average night landing a bit above 3 goals scored and just over 3 allowed, which naturally pushes a lot of their results into that 6-goal neighborhood. Toronto lives in a very similar scoring climate, putting up a shade over 3 goals per game while giving up slightly more than they score, and that combination is pretty much a recipe for totals that lean toward chaos rather than quiet, especially when you factor in how many of their recent home dates have turned into track meets once something goes wrong early. If you just scroll back through the recent Buffalo schedule, it reads like a highlight reel of multi-goal nights: 5 in Nashville, 4 in Montreal, 5 against the Islanders, and even when they stub their toe, it often comes in games where the scoreboard still ends up busy because of how aggressively they attack when they are chasing or protecting a lead. Toronto, for its part, has not exactly been locking things down either, with that goals against number sitting on the wrong side of their goals for and some recent losses at home featuring defensive breakdowns, odd man rushes, and long stretches where their goaltender is asked to put out too many fires in a single period. When you drop these two profiles into a divisional game with real implications in the standings, you tend to see coaches accept more risk as the night goes on. Because a single point is nice, but 2 points are precious, and that usually means extra aggressive pinches, stretched breakout passes, and the kind of open ice in the third period that both invites scoring chances and punishes tired legs. There is always a universe where a goalie steals the show, or the posts get in the way, or both teams suddenly decide to play a tight 3-2 style that looks nothing like their season to date. But if you follow the larger pattern of how often these clubs trade chances, how frequently their games land in the 6 or 7 goal window, and how emotional a building like Toronto can get when momentum swings, the more natural expectation is a night where the scoreboard operator stays busy rather than bored. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Vegas Golden Knights versus Montreal Canadiens. Bell Center on a Tuesday night is not where visiting teams usually go to feel better about themselves, and Vegas is coming in still smelling like that 7-1 embarrassment in Ottawa, wrapping up a 4-game road trip that has gone from statement chance to pure damage control. Montreal, on the other hand, is stuck in a knife fight of an Atlantic race, sitting on 63 points with Buffalo and Boston right on their shoulder and Tampa and Detroit just ahead, so every home date feels like a mini playoff game with a bit of extra edge in the building. You are talking about a Canadiens team that leads the entire league in goals per game at roughly 3.37 while still giving up more than 3 a night, which is a polite way of saying their style leans into chaos and they are comfortable there. Vegas usually prefers something very different, a structured game where they outshoot opponents, hold shots against in the mid-20 range, and lean on a power play north of 26% along with a penalty kill that sits above 80%, the kind of special teams profile that normally travels pretty well. The funny thing is that structure has taken a punch recently because in their last 5 games, the Golden Knights have allowed goal totals of 7, 3, 4, 2, and 7, including that messy night in Ottawa, which is not exactly the profile of a road favorite that is locking teams down. Montreal has not exactly been boring either, with those same last 5 outings turning into wild scoreboards, including lines of 7, 6, 7, 11, and 8 combined goals, and that 4-3 loss in Boston where one winger practically dragged the offense along by scoring all 3 for the Habs. There is also a bit of quiet confidence that comes from already going into Vegas earlier in the season and skating out with a 4-1 win in the first meeting of this series, because players remember how that felt, and it chips away at the mystique that usually comes with that Golden Knights logo. Look at the basic home and road split. Montreal sitting at 14-11-1 in this building, while Vegas holds a 13-7-6 mark away from home, and you get a picture of a matchup where the environment and travel spot are doing the Habs more favors than the Knights, especially after 3 previous road games. Oddsmakers still have Vegas posted as a small road favorite in roughly the -115 range, with Montreal around -102, which tells you the market is giving a lot of respect to the brand name and the recent history of the Knights, even though the Canadiens have the better record right now and the league-leading attack. Honestly, when you layer on top that both teams are missing a couple of regulars, with Vegas looking thinner down the middle and Montreal without a big-name finisher on the wing according to the latest reports, and you still have a Canadiens group that generates chances and finishes at a high rate, helped by a loud building and a schedule spot that nudges energy to their side, it makes them feel like a very live home underdog on the money line in this matchup. As our first pick for this matchup, the Montreal Canadiens money line is our full game side pick. Oddsmakers have looked at a Montreal team that scores more than 3 1/3 goals per night and allows more than 3, then looked at a Vegas team that sits a little above 3 for and around 3 against while flashing strong special teams, and settled on a projected number of 6.5 for this contest. On paper, that can sound a touch high for a random regular season game, until you remember that Montreal's last 5 have all cleared at least 6 total goals, and 4 of those nights climbed past 7, which tells you this group has been living in track meet territory more often than not lately. Those games include a 6-5 overtime thrill ride and that 4-3 heartbreaker in Boston, which both fit the same pattern of big swings, momentum shifts, and very little in the way of quiet, low-event hockey. Vegas is not exactly reviving the old low-risk trap either, as their last 5 have featured combined goal counts of 8, 9, 7, 3, and 9, with that 7-1 beating on this trip sitting like a bruise that usually leads either to a tighter but still fragile response or to a wide-open game where they try to trade rushes to feel good again. Stylistically, the matchup kind of eggs a fence on, because Vegas wants to control the puck and fire close to 29 shots a night while allowing fewer than 25, and Montreal is happy to open things up by taking around 26 shots, giving up nearly 27, and betting that their shooters can win a race instead of grinding through a chess match. When you add in the discipline gap, with Montreal sitting on more than 550 penalty minutes compared to roughly 350 for Vegas, and a penalty kill that sits under 77% facing a Golden Knights power play in the 26% range, you start to see how extra power play chances can turn into extra red lights. The Bell Center crowd also tends to push the gas pedal instead of calming things down, and with both benches very aware of the standings picture and how often their recent box scores have looked like pinball machines, the stage is set for another high-event night with rush chances and broken plays all over the ice. So when you put together elite finishing talent, shaky penalty killing, recent score lines that look more like video game sessions, and a posted number that still sits at 6.5 instead of 7, it feels far more likely that bettors are sweating whether this one gets to 8 goals than wondering if it can even limp its way to 6. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Utah Mammoth versus Florida Panthers. Let's set the scene for this matchup. You have the new kids from the mountains skating into sunrise on the second night of a Florida back-to-back, coming off a tough 2-0 loss in Tampa where, honestly, they did almost everything right except solve the goalie in front of them. Utah took one of the top attacks in the league and held them to 2 power play goals, and at 5-on-5 they basically turned the whole thing into a trench fight where space was a luxury and clean looks were rare. That is not some random one-off either, it fits how they have played all season, sitting near the top of the league in goals against and shots allowed, built around a compact road style that travels well and keeps games tight instead of wild. Now they walk into the building of the back-to-back champs, a team on a 3-game heater that has never lost to this franchise, 3-0 all-time with the last couple meetings decided by just a single goal. The market has clearly bought into that aura, with Florida posted as a clear home favorite in that mid-160 range and Utah hanging around +130 as the road dog. On paper it looks simple, the established power with rings on the shelf and a loud crowd behind them against a Year 2 team that just got blanked last night, and you can almost hear casual bettors clicking the big home favorite without a second thought. That kind of setup often stretches the underdog price a little, because everyone loves the brand name team in their own barn, and that love tends to get baked right into the number. Here is the thing though, if you look past the banners and the noise in the building, the matchup on the ice feels a lot closer to a coin flip than the line suggests. Utah brings a top 15 level offense, a defensive shell that has been genuinely elite, a goal differential in the +20 neighborhood, and a style built for those ugly, one-goal grinders where every dump in and every chip out matters. Florida, on the other hand, has been more chaotic than truly dominant this season, sitting in the middle of the pack in scoring, down near the bottom third in goals against, and piling up penalties that keep dragging their games into choppy, stop-start stretches instead of pure flow. That kind of messy, special teams-heavy environment actually suits a disciplined, structure-first group that is happy to stay patient, lean on its system for 60 minutes, and try to steal the game late rather than play track meet hockey. Add in a little context and the picture sharpens. Utah rolled into Tampa on a 5-game win streak before running into a goalie playing at peak form, so their confidence in the blueprint should still be intact. Florida has the weight of do not lose to the new kids on its shoulders while also trying to protect that current streak, and that pressure can quietly seep into decision-making, especially if the game stays tight deep into the third. In that kind of spot, getting plus money on the more stable defensive side feels less like buying a lottery ticket and more like taking a measured swing where the risk actually matches the reward. As our first pick for this matchup, the Utah Mammoth money line is our full game side pick. Books have parked this total number at 6.5 with the under carrying extra juice, which means you have to pay a premium if you want the low side, and that alone hints that the market quietly expects a tighter game than the names on the jerseys might suggest. Utah comes in playing some of the stingiest hockey around, sitting in that top 5 range in both goals allowed and shots against, and their road blueprint is almost textbook. Clog the middle, push everything to the outside, and live with scores that look like 2-1 or 3-2. We literally just watched that script in Tampa, where they held a high-end attack to 2 special teams goals and nothing at even strength in a 2-0 grinder that felt like a playoff game, even if the calendar says regular season. Tonight they are again on the second leg of a back-to-back in the same state with short travel, and that kind of spot usually nudges coaches toward simplicity, shorter benches, safer exits, fewer stretch passes, and a lot more get it deep and go change than let us trade rushes. That is not some hard-coded statistic pulled out of a spreadsheet. It is more of a situational read, but over and over you see those games slow down a bit rather than turn into free skating shows. Call that the narrative layer, not the spreadsheet layer. On the Florida side, this is still a two-time defending champion, but the personality of their season has been more grind you down than run and gun. They sit around the middle of the league in scoring, and their recent wins over Winnipeg and Minnesota came by scores like 2-1 in a shootout and 4-3 in overtime. Tight, stressful finishes, rather than 7-4 circus nights where everyone is flying and nobody is back-checking. Panthers games have leaned slightly toward the over the larger sample, which is worth remembering, but the specific dance partner matters a lot here. Utah's elite team defense, Florida's high penalty count paired with Utah's bottom-tier power play. That mix screams lots of whistles, not a ton of extra goals. And it fits with the Mammoth coming off a low-event shutout loss that likely sharpens their defensive focus even more. Put all of that together and you get a game script that smells more like a territorial, playoff-style chess match than a loose, all-star type showcase, with space at a premium and every mistake magnified. To be fair, that last part is somewhat speculative, and it is important to admit that. We are reading the situation, not reciting a table of numbers. But when you stack up how these two teams prefer to play, the back-to-back scheduling angle, and the way the market is already shading the price, the most reasonable way to approach this total is to expect goals to be a little harder to come by than the casual fan might think. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Los Angeles Kings versus Detroit Red Wings. You look at this matchup in Detroit and it feels like the kind of game where the standings and the odds are both nudging you in the same direction, but the actual story on the ice is a bit trickier than it looks at first glance. Detroit is sitting on a record around 32-16-5 with an 18-8-1 mark at home, and they have been on a heater close to 19-5-4 since late November, stacking points in 9 of their last 10 games. So when you open your sportsbook app and see that sort of run, it makes perfect sense that the market has moved them into clear favorite territory around the -130 range, while Los Angeles is sitting there as the plus money option that most people glance at and move right past. That is the surface read. Underneath, this Kings team is built around a very specific identity, and it is not exactly flashy, but it is effective. They love dragging games into that uncomfortable middle where talent gaps shrink, where it is low event at 5-on-5, where the structure stays tight, and where their goals against per 60 minutes still looks a lot like last season's strong defensive numbers. It is the hockey version of making everyone play your pace at a slow dance when the other side clearly wants the DJ to spin nothing but club tracks. Quietly, they have once again been better on the road than at home, which is a little annoying if you are a Kings fan who pays for tickets in Los Angeles, but very relevant if you are looking at this matchup. Their road points percentage sits north of .600, and they tend to score and allow almost the same totals away from home, hovering in that 2.7 to 2.8 goals per game range at both ends of the rink. That sort of balanced road profile travels well, especially into a building where the home team leans into offense and does not mind if the game starts to look a bit like a track meet with line changes. Detroit is missing Simon Edvinsson, one half of their top shutdown pairing alongside Moritz Seider, out through the Olympic break with a lower body issue, and that forces them to stretch the rest of their blue line a little thinner than they would like. When you pull a key defensive piece like that out of the puzzle, the rest of the defense has to play a touch higher in the lineup, and that often means more scrambles, more second chances, and more of those little breakdowns that do not show up on a spreadsheet but absolutely show up on the scoreboard. On the other bench, Los Angeles is still operating without captain Anze Kopitar, who remains on injured reserve with a lower body injury. The important thing here, though, is that his absence has already been baked into their recent results for a couple of weeks, so what you are seeing from them now is not some sudden shock. It is a group that has already adjusted its forward usage and rhythm to life without him for the moment. It is a bit like taking the keynote out of a musical chord, awkward at first, but after a while the band finds a new groove and you stop hearing the missing note quite as loudly. Their number one goaltender, Darcy Kuemper, has been cleared after that scary collision against the Rangers and has already come back to start a game, which is a big mental and tactical boost. So even if we do not have an official confirmation on who gets the crease as of the latest reports, the reality is that Kuemper is available for this road trip, and that gives the coaching staff their full plan in net rather than a patched-together solution. There is also a quirky scheduling wrinkle that does not show up in the basic stats line. Last night's scheduled Kings game against Columbus was postponed and shoved forward into March, so if you are just staring at a schedule grid, it still looks like Los Angeles is in a back-to-back spot. But their legs have not gone through a 60-minute grind. They have only done the travel piece. For a team that already leans on structure more than pure talent, fireworks coming in fresher than the schedule suggests is not a bad little hidden edge. So when you add it all up, what you really have here is a disciplined road team with a proven defensive shell and legitimate goaltending, catching plus money against a hot home side that is missing a key defender and leaning heavily on a goalie who has been riding a serious heater. That does not mean this is some lock. Nothing in betting works like that. But in terms of value and likely game script, it sets up nicely for anyone willing to be the contrarian voice in a building full of red jerseys. As our first pick for this matchup, the Los Angeles Kings money line is our full game side pick. On paper, the phrase Kings hockey still makes a lot of people think of tight, low-scoring hockey, and there is some truth in that because their recent numbers show them leaning back toward that familiar defensive identity this season, with 5-on-5 goals against per 60 minutes staying right around last year's stingy mark. So the stereotype is not random. It does come from how they tend to want games to feel. But here's the thing, the overall scoring environment for these specific teams right now is quite a bit louder than the old reputation suggests. Detroit at home has been putting up around 3.26 goals for and giving up roughly 3.19, which already pushes the average total in this building north of 6 goals before you even factor in who is on the other bench. You do not need to be crunching advanced models on a second monitor to feel that. If you have watched their home games, you can sense that energy in the building when the goals start to stack up. Los Angeles on the road tells a similar story from a different angle. They are scoring and allowing almost identical numbers away from home, hanging around that 2.7 range at both ends, which nudges you toward a baseline expectation hovering between 5.5 and 6 total goals when these two profiles collide. It is almost like two different bands that both like to play a bit louder ending up on the same stage. The decibel level tends to rise whether or not they planned it that way. Stylistically, Detroit in their own arena has often felt like a slow burn, then fireworks team. They will have stretches where things seem under control, then suddenly they hang a 4-goal third period on a good opponent like Winnipeg. And the whole game flips from tight to wild in a handful of shifts. They lean on a power play that loves to run through the half walls and the point, instead of just cranking low-percentage bombs from the blue line, which means that when they get chances, they tend to be dangerous and inside the dots. On the flip side of special teams, the Kings' penalty kill has been stuck in the bottom third of the league by success rate this season, floating in the high 70s, which is not where you want to be when you are dealing with a home power play that is comfortable using puck movement to create backdoor looks and quick tap-in chances. So when you zoom in on that special teams matchup, it naturally tilts the picture toward a game where whistles and penalties can actually help pull the total upward rather than calm things down. Los Angeles still has enough legitimate finishing talent in their forward group. Their current statistical leaders are indeed active and available based on the latest game previews and injury notes that they can absolutely punish a defense that is missing a key piece like Edvinsson and playing a little higher in the lineup than usual. Once the structure gets stretched, this is not a team that refuses to trade chances. They might start from a defensive mindset, but if the doors slide open, they will skate through them. Put those threads together, and the more realistic picture is not a sleepy 2-to-1 goalie duel where both blue lines play perfect hockey for a full 60 minutes, but something much closer to a game that flirts with a 3-to-3 scoreboard late in the third on a regular basis. That is still a projection. It is still probabilistic and not a promise, and any single game can absolutely break differently. But when you combine this building, these injuries, this special teams matchup, and these current season scoring profiles, the smart money feels more comfortable trusting the goal environment rather than betting on every defensive detail, holding together from the opening faceoff to the final horn. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Chicago Blackhawks versus Minnesota Wild. Chicago rolls into St. Paul with a record of 21-23-8, facing a Minnesota group sitting at 29-14-10 and priced around plus 200 for Chicago against roughly minus 245 on the home side. So nobody out there is pretending this is a coin flip. But for a side pick, we are not trying to crown the better team over 82 games. We are trying to catch the right 9 or 10 swings of momentum over 60 minutes, and on that tighter stage, the gap between them feels a lot smaller than the odds board suggests. Chicago's whole identity this season has shifted from hang on and hope to structured, annoying, and weirdly comfortable in close games, and that shows up in how many one-goal results they live in, along with a penalty kill that has been punching above its weight at over 85% on the season. That kind of special teams backbone is exactly what you want from a road dog, because it lets them survive those early pushes where a favorite usually buries teams that are loose or undisciplined. Minnesota's power play is excellent, but the Wild penalty kill has sat in the mid-70s, and that leaves a little crack in the armor for a team like Chicago that does not need 10 chances to make one of those looks count. The quieter story here is how comfortable Chicago has gotten away from home lately, coming into this one on a 4-game road winning streak and actually sitting at 10 wins, 10 losses, and 3 overtime losses on the road overall, which is basically middle of the pack rather than bottom feeder territory. For a group that spent last season treating road games like a tax, that shift tells you the game plan is traveling better and the coaching staff has found a way to keep things simple enough that they are not beating themselves with bad line changes and panic clears every other shift. Then you layer in the top of the roster getting whole again at the right time. Connor Bedard is back and driving play at better than a point per game. Tyler Bertuzzi has taken over as the pure goal scorer on the wing. And now Teuvo Teravainen is expected to rejoin that top unit with Bedard and Frank Nazar after missing time with an upper body issue, giving Chicago a first line that actually looks like a threat rather than a development project. It is not a perfect line. It will still have shifts where it gets hemmed in, but when all three are available and together, it finally gives the Blackhawks a punch that can match a high-end opponent for stretches instead of just trading harmless perimeter shots. On the other side, Minnesota absolutely has more depth, but they are not at full strength on the blue line. Jonas Brodin is out after surgery and expected to miss weeks. Zach Bogosian remains on injured reserve, and that combination chips away at the sturdy, smothering version of the Wild that casual fans still picture from a couple of seasons ago. Without Brodin in particular, they lose one of their cleanest puck movers and most reliable minute eaters, which matters when you are trying to lean on a team that actually thinks it can hang around into the third period. Minnesota has also felt a bit like a team living on the edge lately, with a 3-2 stretch over their last 8 and a bunch of overtime games that look great for neutral fans, but quietly scream, this could have gone either way to bettors. They still have Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Boldy tearing through teams, no question, but when your recent results are decided by one bounce so often, laying a heavy price becomes more about faith than numbers. Chicago, meanwhile, has become that irritating underdog that ruins parlays. They have been an underdog in nearly every game, have already cashed a surprising share of those, and have even pulled off multiple upsets when priced longer than tonight's number, which tells you they are more comfortable in this role than the market sometimes gives them credit for. Add in the mom's trip angle and the psychological bump of getting a skilled veteran like Teravainen back, and you have the classic uncomfortable side that sharp bettors end up holding their nose and clicking on anyway. So while Minnesota is rightly favored and nobody should pretend this is a free square, the combination of Chicago's road form, strong penalty kill, healthy top line, and a banged-up Wild blue line makes the underdog a live side here, not just a prayer. As our first pick for this matchup, the Chicago Blackhawks to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Oddsmakers have this total sitting at 6.5, with the under juiced, which already tells you they see scoring upside here but expect the betting public to lean toward a slightly tighter script. Season-long numbers give us a helpful baseline. Minnesota is sitting a bit over 3 goals per game scored and under 3 allowed, while Chicago is closer to the mid-2s in goals for and just a bit above 3 against. And when you mash those profiles together, you land almost exactly in that 6-goal neighborhood the number represents. That is the boring mathematical part, but the fun starts when you look at how these teams have actually played in recent weeks. Minnesota in particular has been living in track meets. Over their last 10, their power play has been humming near 29%, their penalty kill has been under 80%, and those two ingredients together have produced 73 total goals in those games, which works out to a touch more than 7 per night. You can feel that in the box scores, where 4-3, 6-3, and 5-4 type results keep popping up like they are in some weird personal skills competition. Chicago tells a slightly different story but still points us toward a healthy total. They have tightened up defensively compared to last year, yet even in a more structured version of themselves they are still giving up a little over 3 per game on the season, and in recent form they have been trading chances at around 2.5 scored and just under 3 allowed across their better stretches. It is not run-and-gun chaos, but it is that steady drumbeat of shots against where one bad bounce or a late penalty can flip a 4-goal game into a 6 or 7-goal one in the space of 5 minutes. Special teams are a big part of why this total feels fragile in a good way. Minnesota owns one of the league's more dangerous power plays, and Chicago quietly brings a top-tier penalty kill and a power play that sits around the middle of the pack, but has been hotter than that over its best recent 10-game sample. And when you have one team that can tilt the ice with the man advantage and another that is more than capable of punching back with its own units, you get the kind of swingy special team sequences that absolutely pour gasoline on a total sitting at 6.5. Personnel-wise, both sides have enough firepower available that you do not need a perfect game to get into that 7-goal window. Connor Bedard is back and producing like a legitimate top-line driver again. Tyler Bertuzzi is pacing the Blackhawks in goals, and Tara Vainen returning to that top line adds one more playmaker who can turn a broken play at the blue line into a backdoor tap-in. On the other bench, Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Boldy are both healthy and rolling, with Kaprizov already north of 60 points and Boldy fresh off a game where he scored short-handed and added an assist, which is about as clear a "I feel good again" message as a player can send. When your top lines on both teams feature that kind of finishing talent, it does not take much for a game to swing from "this feels tight" to "wow, that escalated quickly on the scoreboard." The injury picture also quietly leans toward a game with chances rather than a slog. Minnesota is missing Jonas Brodin and Zach Bogosian on the back end, which not only cuts into their defensive depth but also forces other defensemen into heavier minutes and tougher matchups. Exactly the situation where legs get tired late and gaps start to open in front of the crease. Chicago's notable absences are mostly longer-term blue line contracts rather than core contributors, and with their main offensive pieces available, they are positioned to attack those soft spots rather than simply trying to survive them. Goaltending on both sides has been solid this season, but not at the erase-every-mistake level that scares you away from an over. Spencer Knight and Philip Gustafsson both sit in the mid-2s for goals against average with save percentages in the low 900s, which is good enough to hold a game together but still leaves plenty of room for 4 or 5 to find their way in if the shot quality ramps up, and we have every reason to expect it will with these power plays and top lines. So when you combine Minnesota's recent high-event pattern, Chicago's willingness to trade enough chances to stay in games, dangerous special teams on both benches, and key absences on the wild blue line, that 6.5 does not look like a ceiling so much as a fair median in a game that has real 7 or 8 goal potential if it ever gets stretched. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.